Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And if you'd like a visual descriptor, I am a 38-year-old white woman. I have pink, purple, and blue hair. I'm wearing pink glasses and a white t-shirt. Now, I'm here today with Reverend Smitty Buckler, and we're going to be talking about UXMAL, which is a user-designed and developed mutual aid and liberation AI app. Now, UXMAL will is going to is Lord, I just messed up my whole intro.
It's all good.
Okay, hold on.
I'll start again. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Hey, y'all. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And if you'd like a visual descriptor, I am a 38-year-old white woman. I have pink and purple hair, pink glasses, and I'm wearing a white t-shirt. Now, I am here today to talk with Reverend Smitty Buckler. Now, we're going to be talking about UXMAL, which is a user-designed and developed mutual aid and liberation AI app. Now, Smitty is going to join us and talk to us a little bit more about what it was like to build XMAL and what they hope that you'll get out of it. The idea is a social media app. It's like Buy Nothing meets Discord meets Lex, combined with feedback like Yelp and mental health apps like Calm and Finch. Now, I'm very excited to get to talk to Smitty about this, but UXMAL is primarily brought up in mind for use by intersectional, trans, queer, disabled, Native, and people of color. So, Smitty, I'm very excited to welcome you to the stage today. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this today and about this project in general. Um, so yeah, my kind of background is that I have a very typical, I think in a lot of ways, queer trans story. I grew up in a rural environment, and at 14, I left home. My parents split when I was really young, and I moved from my mom's to my dad's. And I survived, and I even got my GED a year early so that I could work full time in order to be able to afford my own place. So always been that kind of like resiliency, I guess you could say. There's kind of like a whole thing around resiliency right now in conversation, but in general, then I moved to Spokane, Washington, which really felt like the big city. And I volunteered and started teaching at-risk youth. And I've basically been doing grassroots organizing since then around queer and trans artists specifically, kind of. And then we started out as queer artists and then kind of started widening that net because we realized that we just needed to be intersectional in nature. Um, And so in 2004, kind of some of the projects that I'd been doing around town, like having open mics and gallery shows, we kind of decided to become the first iteration of COG. And 20 years of basically self-funding projects, self-funding art projects, and using fiscal sponsors. We have now incorporated into our own 501c3. Our leadership basically decided that we could serve our communities better by incorporating. I think that kind of came from a place of us, and especially me, realizing that I didn't have any mentors and there wasn't anybody to like get me through the door, I guess you could say. So that's why COG began. And I think now there's a lot more opportunities that are available for people. So we've really been kind of changing our focus and trying to think about long term and sustainability as opposed to just kind of doing an art project here and an art project there. Um, and I think also kind of in this, I was thinking about an introduction around being autodidactic. So most of the stuff that I have learned has been around teaching myself, maybe a little bit of having somebody else teach me. And right now I am volunteering as a senior UX researcher at Out in Tech's Rockstar program. So I am really taking all of this programming, engineering, and graphic design background and combining it with this research background I have to kind of focus on how to do user research. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can figure out how to do this project the best.
Very
That
cool.
yeah,
I love that when a project kind of presents you with a skill tree that you actually need to learn first.
yeah,
I very much appreciate those, especially when it's especially in a creative field when I kind of feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew. For me, that's where it starts to get fun. So it sounds like you might be along the same lines.
definitely.
All
Definitely.
right. So you mentioned COG earlier. That's Conspiracy of Geniuses. What should people know about COG? What do they need to understand about Conspiracy of Geniuses to understand UXMAL?
Um, that is a good question. I have a usually little thing that I say. I mean, our purpose is really about intersectional liberation. We come from like a transfeminist perspective that really values intersectionality and are very much focused. I mean, we've always been the people who are doing the work and involved in the projects are making the decisions about the projects. And I mean, aside from that, we're an art-based organization, and we have a project XML came out of, which is called RADCare, Radical, Accessible, and Decolonizing Care, which is was really focused on some research I did and is based on the idea that artists aren't going to be able to make art, like we're not going to be able to make a living history, and we're going to continue to be erasured if we don't figure out how to take care of ourselves and each other, mostly each other, because a lot of this interpersonal neurobiology stuff that we deal with really needs to have that community there.
Excellent. Okay. Now let's take a step back and we'll go into Yuxmal. There's so many apps out there, and a lot of the descriptors that we use to kind of give people an idea of Yuxmal reference other apps. So, what do you think makes this app different?
Uh, and that is totally a question that we ask ourselves a lot. I think the main reason that we keep going with this app, it's kind of been something that we've been tossing around for a while, and we kind of keep putting it back around, like further back on the list because there are so many other apps that are out there and they keep on evolving. And we don't want to, you know, we want to make something that is going to be usable for people and what we find is that people continue to talk about needing resources, but the way that like the apps that are there are not working for people anymore. And I think that especially with like user and I mean Facebook and Meta and um, Instagram, that whole conglomeration has been really bad about censoring and shadow banning people, and it's just not a very healthy place. And we have other apps that pop up, but they just are not working for people, right? And so I think that what kind of ends up happening is that we have a few people who are working on these apps and not really doing a lot of the user research that needs to be done in order to make them actually working for people. And so that's the probably biggest thing. Like we're doing open source, but we're also doing it, and I'm having conversations in like, how do we figure out how to make web or like app development accessible to people who are not techies and things like doing like bug reports and stuff like that that a lot of folks who do tech understand in a way. And we hope to recruit the app is still in development, so we hope to recruit folks. The idea that we have right now is to do a like a training, like a boot camp for people, so that we can have people who are doing user research and have programmers who are kind of like and designers all working together um, in a short term to at least get a prototype out there and then
Mhm.
start doing more research on it. And I think that that is the biggest thing, is that we're really focused on doing user developed apps, which is very different than anything else that's being done right now. I think also it's kind of being very ADHD. Sometimes there's a tendency to want to put all the things in the pot and trying to figure out if there's too much, but also feeling like there's things that I need them to just be combined in a way, like I just
Mhm.
need to be able to have a app that, like is there and supports me emotionally, I guess you could say, and helps me access resources and helps me get real feedback on those resources from people who share identities with me and also access those communities because that interpersonal dynamic is really important. So I think that that's
This is
kind
a
of,
big idea.
yeah. But the idea is that there's going to be an AI function to it, and that AI function is basically going to walk people through stuff. So, like, how, like, a lot of, I mean, you can even, I think people don't really understand AI a lot. Like, when you type something into Google, that's basically AI that's helping you find an answer, right?
Yeah.
So we're just basically thinking of having an interface that somebody will, talk to and can ask questions and, be like, I want a community that's like this, and they can help them find a group, a chat room, right?
Hmm.
Or like, I need to find a doctor, and they can help them find that resource instead of feeling like, I feel really, I mean, there's a ton of lists out there, and there's a ton of websites that have lists, and we hope to kind of like data mine some of those, but
Yeah.
having
Well, but it makes a lot of sense, right? So as you're talking, what I'm basically picturing is Ask Jeeves, right? That's kind of what most of us kind of cut our teeth on, at least at the beginning of the internet, was this idea that you would go ask like the internet butler who would go gather the answers for you and bring them back. And I am, like I said, I'm 38. So I learned computers in grade school in like the computer bus that would drive to my school, and that's how I had my first intro to all of this. And I remember a couple weeks ago talking to my mom, and she was telling me that my uncle, who's like getting up in age, he was just so frustrated because he couldn't reach directory assistance. And she was trying to explain to him, like, that's not really a thing anymore. And then
yeah,
I swooped in and got to somewhat save the day with, oh, have you tried putting Chat GPT on his phone? Because then he could use it. And you're right, it does very much function. It functions like Google, but it talks to you more like a person would, or at least, the limited experiences that I have had with AI have done that. So that sounds like a really great idea. Like it would totally work because if you have an AI that understands the purpose of the app and understands what you're trying to do, then you don't have to be a developer to talk it to the AI, like, to get the answers or to get the information that you're seeking. You can just talk to them like a person and actually get the help you need. Now, did was I missing something? Did you say that this is partially like a game as well, or do we want to talk through how the AI functions first?
it's up to you. I think we kind of did talk about the AI a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Um, I mean, what you're talking about is really natural language processing, and the way that, I mean, it's just basically the programming and how that interfaces, right? The other thing that we're talking about is with Chat GPT, it is based on a database that's already there. And kind of the evolution of AI right now is a self-training AI. So an AI that is going to learn from your behavior and your inputs to become better, like better suited specifically to you. So now we're kind of talking about Siri level AI, right? Of something that is, and then I think a Siri in a lot of ways might really be a good analogy, except for that a lot of people don't feel good about using Siri for a lot of different ways that we don't really have time to get into, but right. Um, so we're really like trying to figure out, there's a brick stack type model. It's a group, an organization that has created a larger database to draw from that gets updated regularly. So we can do that, or we can work on creating our own database and just figuring right now is kind of the figuring out how to have the code to make it so the updated database works with the AI, right? Because it's the programming wise, it's just based on usually a stagnant database. Google is really the only one that has, well, the best one that has the ability to update its own database regularly.
All right. So, I want to talk about the role that users are going to play in this. Obviously, you talked about how this is kind of a user-defined app, which can be a bit of a mind meld for people that are used to maybe those orders being reversed. What role do you want users to play in the building of this app, in the refining of it? What do you foresee?
Uh, well, definitely in the original development, right? Really trying to figure out ways to make that accessible for people, which is where the boot camp comes in. There's actually just not a lot of boot camps that are accessible, especially for people with disabilities. Oftentimes they require like a lot of time in a day and a week, and most people just don't have the spoons for that. So, making sure that what we're doing is accessible. That's really that A in the rad care, very important. And kind of rad care is our defining ethos, which is kind of why I brought it up. It's kind of like how we make decisions. And then, so kind of jumping into that game part, the idea is, and we're kind of envisioning like an 8-piece, 8-bit dungeon sleuthing game, where you go around and you find chests and then you have to answer questions in the chests. And if you get it right, you get points and prizes and you get to move on to the next level. If you get it wrong, there'll be resources for the user to find out more information on the subject.
I love
So
that.
when people pass a level, then they get badges, and then that gives them more access to different parts of the app, specifically such as being able to like start and moderate groups. So the game is going to be going through basic kind of social justice stuff, and as people progress through the understanding of it, they have more leadership roles within the app to help develop and define how the app is for the user. And that's kind of comes from a place of like, I feel like I've done so many social justice trainings and anti-oppression trainings and trans 101 trainings and this training and that training. And I try to make them interesting and they're just boring,
Mhm.
like they're just, so this idea of the game really came from how do we help people get the skills that they need in order to be in an intersectional space and also make it fun. So that's kind of where the game comes in. And also, like I said, it was a part of how we're going to develop leadership. And through that leadership is the idea that as social justice language changes, that there will be an advisory board that helps us update the app to make it current and relevant always.
I love this. Okay. Now if you are, obviously we've talked a little bit about, kind of the role that the users would play in it. How about developing this? Do you anticipate this being developed like using the community? Do you envision like a hackathon being part of this? What are you like what do you have in mind as you're trying to make this a reality?
Uh, Definitely. The boot camp is part of it. The idea of being able to find some people who know what they're doing to help train other people to figure out what they're doing. And then after that, we're hoping to be able to have enough of a prototype to then have a hackathon, which will hopefully create something that's usable. Honestly, it is kind of a very complex idea, and there's not a lot of people who do AI stuff. I have been teaching myself infinite amounts of information and absolutely loving it. um,
Everybody loves a new hyperfixation, right?
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. Uh, so that's it might take more than one hackathon or it might take going back to the drawing board, but having the idea of it being continuing to be open source and having it be available for people to update and make better is the root of what we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as you're thinking about this app, just a off the cuff question from me. As you're thinking about this app and you're envisioning the kind of people that would be helped by it, as you're trying to cover so many intersectionalities, how do you think in those terms? Is there like a base app user that you are envisioning to start with and then go off from there into the different, accommodations or something that different groups might need. How do you think about this when you're just starting?
That is a very kind of big question. I do think that it goes back to the idea of being the user-centric model. And while Databricks might give us a larger database, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better database, because of things like access issues and yada yada. So, I mean, it really like I always go back to the radical care, the rad care, and thinking of radical as getting to the roots of the problem, thinking very much in terms of that as how radical functions. And then accessible is really, making sure that we have the understanding and the checks that are there. And it's kind of one of my passions as well as what does accessible internet really mean? In a lot of ways, like what do different people need and how do we best do that? And I don't have a lot of those answers. And so that's the time that I'm going to start trying to bring in people from the community and having them interact with the app. I mean, there's certain things like, thinking about whether captions or having somebody actually do an ASL translation works better. Um, that are hard to consider. I mean, there's a lot of the kind of basic accessibility, like web and app accessibility protocols that are there that are pretty easy to follow. But when it comes to kind of more dynamic uh, understanding a user as an individual, and yeah, I think our base user is really coming from the people that we already have interacted with. So most of the people in our kind of community and our constituency, you could say, are intersectional. Most of them are trans, or non-binary, gender non-conforming. And by most, I mean like literally like 95%. And the other 5% is queer. There's a large quantity of Native and other POCs that are engaged. And then I'd also say that at least 75% of our community identifies with having a disability of some sort.
Mhm.
Um, and we also looking at just like the numbers, I would say the people that are most engaged, there's like a 90% below federal poverty level.
Mhm.
In the overall kind of larger scale of people who interact, it's probably more like 75%, but still very much coming from that space, which is kind of why we really want to focus on doing the boot camps and other ways that make it accessible for people
Mhm.
and finding grants to like fund a community advisory board and maybe even give people scholarships. Figuring the boot camp would be free, but scholarships to help pay for living expenses while they do the boot camp have been things that we've been working on for a long time. So I think that when you start talking about accessibility, it really can be a very large conversation. I mean, I've been doing work specifically around accessibility um, since I finished my since I started my undergrad in finished starting my undergrad in 2010. Sorry, I went to school right after I got my GED and then was kind of like, I don't really need this. And then decided to go back to school because I wanted to have the degree. And got to do some really cool stuff and a lot of like the rad care and the facilitating educational kind of stuff all came from that experience. So I'm glad that I had it.
I like that though. You make a ton of sense, and I very much appreciate and admire this idea of a business model where yeah, you need some of that community help and support to get it going, but then you're kind of envisioning a perpetual motion machine effectively, where people that are learning skills get to then teach and reinforce. They get to reinforce the skills to themselves by teaching them to others, which just sounds amazing. Okay, in the couple minutes that we have left, I did want to ask you about if you could elaborate on some of the ways that y'all plan to engage and support your communities through things like hackathons and boot camps. What do you think is going to happen with these communities, or what changes do you hope to see?
I mean, it's definitely one of those things of being able to have something in your portfolio is really, really helpful for getting a tech job. The kind of boot camp that I'm working on with out in tech, I can really see that. I can see how it's really helpful for my mentees and being able to develop the skills that they need to be successful in a job. And then it also gives them a chance to have somebody that they can have put down as a reference who can talk about the work that they've done.
Mhm.
Um, so there's that very direct impact. And like I said, definitely looking at trying to figure out how to have boot camps and scholarships for the boot camps that help pay for living expenses. Uh, And I mean, we haven't quite figured out the model for that yet. We'll
Oh,
probably
yeah.
ask for donations, but like we're definitely not going to have it be something that requires people to pay for. But the donations could then be used for scholarships, right?
Well, you made a really good point earlier, which I think absolutely bears repeating, which is accessibility is a huge part of this conversation. And it is, like you said, it's a large conversation in and of itself. But then when you raise issues of accessibility, like it's always kind of funny when you raise these questions, and then there are certain people in the room that are like, "Oh yeah, of course. So like, here's what we'll have to do for these people, and this group is going to need this." And then you see, if you look at other faces in the room and you see kind of that fear of like, what do you mean we have to do more? And so I very much appreciate that, it's something that it's a conversation that you're prepared for and that you understand is very much part and parcel of a DEI practice, right? If you can have all of the accommodations in the world, but if people don't know that they're there and can't get to them, then it doesn't matter. So I very much appreciate that you want to make this accessible, not just, on a user level, but also what you're trying to make accessible is the knowledge and the skills required to create this thing in and of itself. Like those are kind of also something that folks can develop as they utilize the app. So I think that's really amazing. Like just a very, very cool idea.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would add also that it is really empowering, right? It really to be seen and to be appreciated and to have your lived experience be valued in a way that really also develops your career, you know, is it's I think helpful in a way that we don't often talk about. It's helpful in that way around mental health, and I think that the continuation of, I mean, honestly, most of the mental health apps that I have tried, I don't get into because it's just like a program and it doesn't feel interactive. And I don't feel like I get to really like make my own course or my own chart like the way that I'm going to do it. And I think that'll really be the difference. And even the idea of the AI really came from this, thought to trying to think around all the accessibilities and like one of them being sight, right? And
Mhm.
one that I don't think about enough, but it definitely came up when I was thinking about it of being like, oh, this is something people can talk to. They don't necessarily have to, well, it's sight, but it's also, like carpal tunnel or
Mhm.
any of those other disabilities. So being able to have that option of being able to either like talk at it or to be able to type in your questions, um, so it's kind of like that's why I was like it's such a hard and huge thing to come into because it's like it is very individualistic and the main problem that I see with accessibility in apps is that it doesn't allow for users to define the things that they need in those apps to make them work for them.
Mhm.
So it might have this blanket solution, but the blanket solution doesn't actually work for them, and they don't have the ability to give input really into that, right? And
Mhm.
maybe, that's why like thinking about bug reports came up of like, how many people are going to know what to actually say in a bug report? Like, that's not
Right?
something
Yeah.
that's accessible to most users. And so even on that level of being like, okay, how do we make this something that can be interactive in that way? And in the base code of being like, okay, allowing for the AI to help them make the AI better uh,
Mhm.
by doing things like figuring out how to make a bug report and taking what they're saying into something that is translatable to the programmers or
Yeah.
project. Yeah.
Very, very cool. All right. So in the last couple minutes we have, if people want to follow you, to support you, where should we send them? What should they know?
The probably the easiest way is the website conspiracyofgeniuses.org. Um, there's also a link tree, but you can find it on the website, but it's like link, you know, link.e
Don't worry. We'll find the link and send it
LINATR
around.
dot yeah.
Okay.
Um we've been really moving away from social media, so I don't really not sure if I want to send people there just
Okay.
because we're on a shadow ban with Meta for
Yeah.
specifically supporting sex workers and sex worker organizing. Uh,
Yeah.
so harm reduction and probably like everything that we post. So it's been an ongoing just like frustration of trying to deal with the censorship that's there and
Hmm.
just divesting. And also interestingly, I learned that Meta is one of the people that is supporting Cop City. So
Yeah.
just kind of, I'm sure you either know what that means or not. You can Google it, but it's kind of one of the reasons that I'm really trying to divest from them as well.
Good
So
idea. Well, Smitty, thank you so, so much. This has been really wonderful to get a chance to speak with you and learn a little bit more about the project. I'm very, very excited about it and cannot wait to see what happens. But thank you so, so much for your time today. And I just really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. It's greatly appreciated.
I greatly appreciate the opportunity and definitely thank you so much for letting me talk about it because the more I can get it out there, the more that we're going to make an awesome app.
Heck yes, I love this. All right. If you want to follow up on Smitty Buckler and their UXMAL app, you can check out the links that are at the bottom of this video. And if this was your first Power to Fly event, I sincerely hope it will not be your last. Thanks so much, Smitty.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.